Survivor Specialists John and McKenna are back and ready to rewind episode 5. You heard me talk with Alexa about the actual episode last night, so I'm ready to talk with John now about this episode in the past.
Yeah, this is an interesting episode to kind of examine and evaluate because I feel like we kind of had a lot of spiritual moments, like spiritual successors to moments this time around, but not so much actual, defined moments for a lot of things that happen in this episode.
Yeah. So let's dive right into it and go with the first thing that we see is Sifu's like, all right, who voted for me? I should probably say it a little bit differently. Who voted for me? Because that is like Rupert in Pearl Islands, obviously, where he goes on his tirade of who the heck voted for me and tried to, math it out, and eventually, fair play fesses up.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this is what we go to when we think about someone asking who voted for them. Like, we go to the Rupert, we go to Lex in Africa after T-Bird cast the vote on him. I think the difference here with the way Sifu approaches it is Sifu is so much more calm than either of those two were.
Yeah, though he's kind of like Lex in like he's trying to math it out of who voted for him and trying to be analytical. But it's also very interesting, we can relate this to Worlds Apart as well when Sierra got caught votes at the Lindsay boot, which is the episode we're watching over on the Patreon.
Crazy.
So watch episode technically 4 of Worlds Apart season 30, but skip all the way to 4520. Because we're not going to deal with the Lindsay boot. We're just going to watch from the swap to the Max boot. So it's going to be a good time over there on the Patreon. So yeah, Sierra catches some votes and is just like, why the heck you voting for me?
And the interesting thing with that, in contrast to what we're seeing in last night's episode, is just fessing up to it in last night's episode because they didn't want the wrath of Sifu or something like that. Everyone's like, no, I voted for Sean. And Sifu's like, okay, well, one of you has to be lying because there was literally only 3 votes for Sean. And I know I cast one of them.
Yeah, right.
But in contrast, like in Worlds Apart, you have Mike just essentially being like, okay, Sierra, let's talk it out. And Dan being like, yeah, in case there was an idol, we needed to make sure it wasn't one of us going home.
Yeah, we'll dive a little bit deeper into that over on the Patreon. So now is the time. Become a patron because we also want to make John watch Jack and Jill. So we need 10 new $20 patrons. So if you're a 1, a 5, a 10, bump up to that 20. It will still count. Or if you're not a patron, get yourself to that $20 membership, and John will watch Jack and Jill
on the Discord. You can all join in and watch me. You don't even have to watch the movie. You just have to watch me react to the movie.
Yeah, just have him on in the background being like, oh, this is the worst. Alrighty, so let's move over to Bello, where Kendra eats a worm. And so, another Worlds Apart reference. Hey, Mike with the scorpion and vomiting himself and be like, that was not a good idea. I'm sick.
Yeah, and I mean, this is hardly the first time we've seen someone on Survivor eat a worm. In fact, we saw someone last season eat a worm. In fact, I'm kind of surprised we don't see it more in this new era, considering like the lack of food. I'm really surprised we don't see more eat the bugs for protein theory flying around there.
Yeah, but what got me thinking, and actually my fiance brought it up during the episode, is we should get more of the eating challenges back because we haven't seen bugging out in a while.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, again, like, in theory, it should be an easy thing to do. When was the last time we saw it? Was it Ghost
Island? Yeah.
And we see Kendra kind of like choking up this worm and stuff, and it's so reminiscent of Borneo. And Jervis's response.
Did you say Borneo, John? Come
I
on.
did say Borneo. But Jervis's response in that challenge, right? And we've seen it time and time again, where it's an entertaining challenge, and seeing how tribes adjust to it or individuals adjust to it is huge. I wonder if they're just excluding it because they're like, well, we can't give them any type of eating in this new era where we're trying to starve them.
Yeah, but I think you can. I think you can give them a little bit of eating. And you could even shorten it to the number of rounds. Like, in I want to say Karamoan, it was just like, all right, half the people, and then a second round and you're done. Like it wasn't that many rounds of eating.
Yeah, that's true. I'm actually more of a fan of get the loved ones to do the eating challenge.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't get that. We don't get that because we don't have loved ones.
That's
true.
Like,
come on, Survivor. You're doing so good this season at bringing back what we want. You've given us ancient voices. You've given us just so much more of that old
previously
on. You've given us even a swap. Like you're feeding us that old school energy. We want more though. Give us a little bit more.
Listen, if Amazing Race can go back to airport shenanigans and not charter flights, we can get these loved ones on this island.
Exactly. We just need a little more time, right?
Yeah. So now we're heading on over to the Lulu Beach, and Caleb is making all of these one-on-one connections with everybody. And that got me thinking that's very similar to what Nick Wilson was trying to do in David versus Goliath, with making his one-on-one connections and then naming those alliances, like the Thoroughbreds, the Mason-Dixon Alliance, and the Rockstars.
Yeah, obviously that's the most obvious example we can lead to. These type of relationships, though, happen in every season. We just don't get to see them. And it's one of those benefits of these 90-minute episodes, right? Is we get to see in an episode where Lulu doesn't go to tribal council, like nothing exciting happens. We still get to see these moments where Caleb is building these relationships to lead us to a plot point that'll probably happen later on in the season.
Mm-hmm. Because he's like, all right, Kelly seems like she's in the power position. Everybody really likes Kelly and wants to rope Kelly in on things, which kind of feels like Sarah in Game Changers, how she was the popular girl on the beach and everybody wanted to get Sarah in on everything. And she put up that energy of like just that great social connection.
Yeah, it's really interesting because there aren't a lot of times where we see people in a swap scenario be like, okay, this is the person who is the most threatening person on the beach, and I need to work with them as the other most threatening person. We usually kind of see these two powers going at each other and kind of like facing off. Whereas instead, what we're seeing is Caleb identify Kelly as, yeah, she's in the strongest position on this tribe. And it's really interesting, especially in this situation, because Caleb's literally there with most of Kelly's original tribe.
Yep.
So like he's able to identify the strength and positioning that Kelly has, and also has enough wherewithal to be like, this is who I want to be working with. Yeah, it's going to be dangerous later on, but if I'm working with Kelly now, I can run the tribe. And we just don't see that often. When we get these connections at swaps, we're usually thinking something along the lines of Worlds Apart, where Rodney and Joaquin become incredibly close all of a sudden because they just like have that personality connection. It's actually not that common for us to see this top-heavy strategic connection at a swap.
Yep, exactly. It'll be interesting to see how their relationship plays out, because I don't think Kelly is as tied to her Bellow members as like it may seem, because I don't see where she connects. Like she likes them, okay, but I don't see that number one.
Well, it's especially interesting with Bello kind of losing the first member in this fight against Reba.
Mm-hmm.
Too, right? So like that might change these dynamics completely, and we'll see what happens when everyone's on the same beach in the next episode.
Yeah. So speaking of Reba, let's go visit them real quick. And they talk about the quit again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that Survivor doesn't necessarily do. They deal with it at the time of the quit. They might get a few confessionals at the time of the quit, or like the aftermath in the next episode when it's all dark, coming back from tribal council. But this is just another section of like, man, Sean sucks.
Yeah, and I think part of this is production obviously being upset that like a second person has quit in this season. But other than, I don't know, maybe Julie's quit in San Juan del Sur, we don't really have a lot of conversation of like the consequences of a quit and how much it's impacted everyone who's still in the game in the situation, and like their how they're handling it, because we obviously know based on that, Jeremy gets into a rough position in San Juan del Sur because Julie quits, right? And he gets that confessional, but like you said, we don't usually get this scene afterwards. Like it's already been addressed first thing in this episode, but here we are revisiting it, and that's just not something that happens. We don't have, we don't have a full scene dedicated in Pearl Islands to, oh, Austin quit. Like, oh man, that completely messes up Savage's game, right? Like we don't have that, and we don't have this idea of like, again, like it's kind of different because Sean, says, no, I didn't vote for you to Sifu as he leaves and everything. But we have that type of conversation happening too of like, oh, he quit and he's taking our game on the way out. I don't think that's the case. I think he kind of just didn't have the wherewithal, or I think he was just at the point, he was checked out of the game at that point when he was gone. Sifu asks him, he just honestly answers, not thinking, oh, this could have game repercussions. But it's so fascinating to have these players ruminating on it. I don't know if this is a result of production being upset that there's another quit. I don't know if this is a result of 90-minute episodes. But previously, Survivor like shying away from quits. They kind of like tarnish the brand of Survivor, and they don't really like talking about them.
Yeah, exactly. It was wild that they did revisit it. But we're not going to revisit it any longer, and we're going to go to Bello. And I have a bone to pick with the nerds don't go far bullcrap that was spewing, because we have so many quote unquote nerds that go far in this game.
We do. Obviously, we have one of the biggest nerds in Survivor history won the game with Cochran.
Yep.
We have a runner-up in Steven Fishback.
Yep. Who memorized 2 telephone numbers to do a math problem? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, exactly, right? And like knew that you remember things in 3s and 7s. Depending on where you're arguing, like far in the game is, like Christian makes 7th in David vs. Goliath. It's not all the way, but it's still pretty damn far. Yeah, 20-person season.
David Wright.
Yeah, David Wright. Rob Sesternino.
Yeah. We have all of these examples of these nerds making it far. I mean, then you can extend out to like, the medical nerds where you have, Dr. Mike who's going far in his season. So it's like there's so many nerds that go far. It's actually the physical that rarely make it to that final tribal council.
I think a lot of this comes from the misconception, especially in the new era, where there is an emphasis on physicality for the pre-merge portion of the game, that you think, oh, the nerds go home here, right? But even if we look at like last season's nerd was Kane, who was like a middle of the pack merge boot, but he isn't that prototypical like scrawny nerd. He was a much more bigger and bulkier guy, right?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of this comes down to just like this misconception. There are a lot of misconceptions, especially about nerds in Survivor and like just like fact checking. I'll talk about it tomorrow on the Patreon when we're talking about Worlds Apart, because there is something in there that I really want to discuss that is a misconception when it comes to Survivor. But the other thing is like, it's really interesting how this conversation between Brando and Drew goes from a nerd perspective. And I'm going to nerd out for a second here. Arguably, Pokemon is like one of the most mainstream nerd topics ever.
Yep.
Ever. And granted, the depth of conversation that they are having takes it further than that, scope of open public knowledge of Pokemon.
Yeah.
However, like just a conversation about Pokemon isn't really nerdy. It's not inherently nerdy, right? Like Pokemon's been around since what, 95 now? Pokemon's older than most of the contestants on this season.
It's older than me, John.
I know. But that's the point. Like, and it's just like it's not nerdy anymore, because like that quote unquote nerd archetype, when we did have someone like Cochrane, it doesn't really exist in society as much anymore.
Yeah, it seems like you can spit and someone is playing D&D. Like that's like a common occurrence now.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, right? Like it just being a nerd's just cool now, and that's all that matters.
Yeah, and so the dash into this Patreon episode of Worlds Apart is, the Survivor nerd versus the casual viewer. And nowadays we get the Survivor nerd on our TV and less of the casual Survivor viewer. But we will dive deeper into that later. So then Drew shuts down this alliance from Brando. And that got me thinking of Penner in Philippines, where he's talking to Lisa and she reaches out the olive branch of like, maybe we can do something and work together. And Penner's like, I like it, but I'm not going to commit. And that's the reason why he goes, is because he doesn't commit. And typically the thing is always say yes. And the fact that Drew was like, nah, that he had the confidence that he had Emily, was a very new school kind of thing, or new era, should I say, kind of thing.
I don't know if it was just the confidence of having Emily. I think it's also the confidence of having him and his closest ally having two advantages that made it impossible for them to get voted out if they so chose at this tribal council. But it is really interesting to see this type of affront to this general idea we have of Survivor strategy that you always say yes. We don't see it that often. We kind of get it like, I want to say we get it more in those like, those grittier seasons where people kind of hate each other a lot more. You think you're like your good bones, your Worlds Apart. And even in Worlds Apart, you have people being like, yeah, we know we just offended you, but we still need you. So like, we can still work this out, right?
Exactly. And now kind of going off the somewhat same note of Lulu, the placate until the blind side is what kind of Caleb is doing with Bruce. And so you have Bruce being this big leader, and Caleb's like, yes, I'll have you show me how to chop a coconut. I can do it myself, but I'll have you tell me how to chop this coconut. And that's almost like the swap tribe in Winners at War with Boston Rob being like, all right, buddy system worked for me last time. I'm just going to buddy system this again. And Adam snuck away from the buddy system real quick and was able to vote him out.
Yeah. Yeah, or I think maybe one of the best examples is like going back to South Pacific, because we seem to do that a lot this season. Just with Sophie and Albert and their placating of Coach and his religious cult, right? Like sometimes you just have to roll with the punches in Survivor and take that back seat. It's one of those things that has paid off very well for people who are willing to do it. But a lot of people let their ego get in the way. And that's what's so impressive about the way Caleb's doing this is someone being bossed around like Bruce. I mean, it's funny because we kind of get both sides of it, right? Because we get the Katurah side of it, where Katura's very agitated by the way Bruce is. And Caleb being like, yeah, I'm agitated, but I'm not going to like tell anyone that. I'm just going to sit here and eventually turn it around on Bruce.
Yeah, exactly. And it's going to be fun to see what happens there. But you know what else is fun, John? The challenges. That's super fun. So we're going to go.
Especially when they don't happen until 43 minutes into an episode.
I love the challenges. So let's talk about it. First, we're going to talk about this like 3-tiered kind of maze situation. So, God bless you. So the one thing that we have is the 3-tiered maze thing, but it's with ropes that you're attached to. And you kind of have to like wind all around it and get to the bottom, similar to just like the flat kind of linear rope thingy. I don't know. And we see that in Heroes versus Villains at the second part of that individual immunity challenge.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you can take this fairly boring maze that we have in this and make it a lot more complicated by having these ropes go through and like making it so that people have to backtrack and go back the way they came, go up and over and under and back over. We're not seeing that in the new era, though.
That would take too long. I feel like if it would have to be like just one person or 2 people running it through, but 3 people to be attached to a rope, like that's a lot. So we have things like Winners at War with the lighthouse. It ended at the lighthouse puzzle. There's that challenge where it's like a 3-tiered kind of obstacle with puzzle piece bags. Same with Philippines, where Abby has the challenge advantage and has no weight attached to her. She can just rip through that challenge and grab those puzzle pieces, untie the knots, etc., etc.
Yeah, and of course, like we've seen these like vertical mazes before in like the Caramon finale and stuff, where Cochrane wins it too with his challenge advantage. And we saw it last season. We saw it in the finale last season. I'm pretty sure this exact same structure. It looked a little. I think they shot it a lot better this time because we got a lot of better look of like the crawl under that they had to do to get the first key. Because it looked so uneventful last season. This season, I felt like it was like, okay, I understand what you're doing. This isn't just like an obstacle. They actually have to go and navigate this. Even we saw in last night's episode where, who was it? It was one of the Reba members. Was it D? Who was like, where do I go now?
Oh,
and
yeah.
the key was like literally right in front of her. But like, it gives you that bit of, it feels like it's a little more disorienting than it was last season.
Yeah, because there's a lot of like pitfalls and get up and, you know, backtrack to a ladder and all that. And then it eventually leads to a slingshot with targets. Now, we have talked a lot about, you know, slingshots and where they appear, but we're actually going to talk about the targets themselves in this episode. So we have things like the drum, like last night, where they have to just hit it and knock it off. Then we have like little plaques that they have to knock down. Sometimes they're tiki faces and a coconut. And then there's clay pots like we see in Worlds Apart with this episode that we're watching. Sometimes there's a paper that you just got to rip through. And then another one is hitting a board and a little flag pops up.
Yeah, and sometimes you're just like trying to finesse these shots into like baskets or things like that. We've seen a wide variety of what slingshots can be used to target. Sometimes the other tribe members are catching what you're shooting from a slingshot. Like there's so many different varieties, and it's kind of nice because, especially I found out last night, there's a bird theme to each of these tribes.
You didn't
know that until last night. Nope, did not realize that until last night.
John.
I was like, wow, there's a different bird on each of these drums. That makes sense.
Yeah, all of the tribe names are birds.
I don't speak Fijian. How was I supposed to know that?
And then the idol is a bird.
I noticed that. I was like, oh, that's cool. It's a bird.
The logo has birds.
I'm going to be honest, I do not pay attention to the season logos anymore.
Oh, John. So then we lead into the picking people for the journey, and it feels a little like the Exile in Micronesia and Tocantins, where you have to choose one of your own members to also go and do the thing, because it adds a little extra dynamic of you're taking away your tribe time. Luckily, you aren't going, like, Reba isn't going to tribal council when they pick one of their people, but then it's like the way you pick them after a swap, oh, we swapped and Austin, a previous tribe mate, is on the other tribe. I'm going to pick him, maybe to keep him safe, maybe to, give him that advantage, what have you. Or get information,
Or get information, like Jay said last night. But honestly, I mean, taking someone who, like, you're supposed to be aligned with, or like who you have a previous relationship with, it's kind of like shooting them in the foot, because you're kind of separating them from their tribe, so they're not part of the strategy talks. It could be very dangerous, especially since Jay. I mean, I know Jay was the one who was saying it. Obviously, it was a tribe decision when it came to Austin. But it's just funny having Jay, the person who doesn't know he has an idol, saying that, and like being like, yeah, we're going to send Austin. But I mean, I'm going to hot take this a little bit further. These journeys are our modern day Exile Island, and they are nowhere near as exciting. No, they're nowhere near as exciting, but they serve the same amount of purpose. I mean, it's a lot closer to Ghost Island than it is to Exile.
We pulled up the thing that the journeys are kind of ghost. The journey plus Exile equals Ghost Island kind of thing, because there's a game or decision that you have to deal with, plus there's the exile of it all, and that would equal Ghost Island.
I think the big difference between this and these, like, Exile Island, something that was reviled at first, but everyone grew to love eventually, is that this is multiple people going instead of one person, and one people. Yep. It's multiple people going, and it gives this chance for, like, these cross tribe relationships to be built, which I'm sure we're going to talk about momentarily. But that's the only real difference we have between these journeys. Okay, we also have the "it's not overnight" aspect of it.
Yeah, thank you. Where they're not fully removed from their tribe is the thing. Like, they're not fully removed from a day's worth of strategy. It's like,
but that's just I personally believe that is simply because there's not enough time to pull them away for a full day. 100%. I think if this was a 39-day season, these journeys would be overnight.
I'm down with that. Bring
back to a 39 season. We know. Because Exile Island hasn't happened since San Juan del Sur. Like, it's actually been a long, like, the proper Exile Island, like, after a challenge where you send someone to Exile Island, not the, hey, you're the odd person out at a swap, go to Exile Island.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Big fan of Exile Island, wearing my Cook Island shirt and my Panama buff bandana. So big Exile Island gal. So let's talk about this journey and the temptations. It's kind of like, the sandwich is the safe option, and the amulet is the temptation, when typically in, like, a temptation challenge, the sandwich would be the temptation.
Yeah, it's kind of reversing it because of when it's happening and who it's happening with. But always pick the sandwich. You always pick the sandwich. They're not feeding you. Take the food. Because especially when on the other side is this amulet that requires you to cooperate with two other people or vote two other people out who are also going to be gunning to vote you out.
Yeah, and in 42, the amulet amounted to nothing and caused everyone to targets. Like, I don't see the appeal to the amulet at all.
I don't see the appeal to it when you're given the choice between something else. I think if you stumble upon the amulet, totally fine. Whatever.
Or if you don't know who else has the amulet or something like that, and you get, like, a note in your bag saying, like, one person down, it's now steal a vote. you get just like a
Yeah.
secret note, no, so you know like where you're at with the amulet.
Yeah, or if it's like you find the amulet on the beach, and then like once you're swapped or merged, you have to like subtly try to figure out who else has this amulet.
Yeah, something like that.
But
And
but you're right. It is a temptation, and it's just so contrary to what we believe these temptations should be. Because when we see these temptations in the past, it is, hey, do you want food or a chance at immunity? Which I guess is technically the same thing that we're seeing here, but it's different when you're actually fighting it out for secured immunity.
Yeah, exactly.
I just hope that we actually get Austin's revenge over this sandwich.
I do too. I'm looking for #sandwich_revenge.
Yeah, me too.
So now we're gonna go over to Tribal Council, and we have Kageon, like we talked about last week, with Sarah having to choose between two sides. We have theoretically Kelly Remington having to choose between two sides in Worlds Apart, but as you'll see watching this episode, Mama C holds all the power. And then we have Rourke, who is the odd one out, and just she goes home, which is a lot different. But as John and I were analyzing this, a lot of specific things have to happen to get blank blank one.
Yeah, in order to get like an XX1 tribe split, you have to have 3 starting tribes. That already limits things. And I'm going to go into this more in tomorrow's Patreon when we talk about this episode in Worlds Apart, but Max refers to this type of split as a classic Survivor split. And that's just not true. It has only happened 3 times prior to this, because it could only physically happen in so many different circumstances. And things have to break exactly correct for it to happen. And what's really interesting is that each of these times that we've seen it, it's kind of been a different scenario unfolding. Whereas like in Kageon with Sarah, it didn't really matter because it became a unanimous vote anyways. In Worlds Apart, which we'll dive into on the Patreon, again, the person in that swing position loses the swing position because someone else decides that they want the power. And then in Triple H, we have the swing position's the target instead. And really, this is the first time we've ever actually seen the person in the swing position actually hold the swing position.
Yeah, it was a wild Tribal Council, and one for the record books.
Yeah, especially because apparently sacrificing a vote and losing a vote is the same thing now.
Yeah. Well, he lost his vote due to I don't know. We're just gonna.
He had his vote at that point. But is the history of Survivor advantages maybe not having the best wording to start? Hopefully, if this goodwill advantage does come back in the future, production looks at this and is like, okay, how do we actually word this so that it does what we want? And it's not like, yeah, I guess you can do that.
Yeah. So, everyone, please join us watching Worlds Apart over on the Patreon. It is episode 4, technically. We're finally playing some Survivor and started at 45:20.
Yeah. So, you know what? Last season, we compared to an episode of the first half of a double episode of Cambodia. Now we're just like following up with a back half episode.
Yeah.
That's what it is. We set the precedent last season. We're just rolling with it now.
Yeah, exactly. John, what's coming up in the Specialist universe?
Well, as always, we do have Phil and Alexa recapping every episode right after it airs. Sometimes it's both of them, most of the time. Sometimes it's Phil and a guest. Sometimes it's Alexa and a guest. I believe coming up next, it's Phil and a guest on Wednesday. Yep. The Predictions of Power Rankings will be on Monday this week, 7 o'clock Eastern, with Dwight from season 43. That should be a very entertaining podcast, so make sure you tune in for that. Then head on over to the Patreon. Become a patron. Become a $20 patron. Make me have to watch Shaq and Jill. I don't want to, but if you do it, I will do it. With that $20 patron, you also get Phil's after show. And you know what? You didn't hear Phil's thoughts on this episode. So what a great time to become a $20 patron to figure out what Phil thought of last night's episode.
Yeah.
You also get us covering a rewind episode every week. McKenna and Celestina are talking about the amazing race this season, which, from what I hear, it's a lot better.
Yeah, it is. But this week, we have a special guest since Celestina is off getting her wedding dress in Slovenia. Sure. It is my good friend, Kyle Durrett, and fellow patron.
And then, of course, we still have all our games going on. If you check out the Twitter today, we did just get the first updates for the prop bet game, the booed list game, and the Bauer ranking. So check that out. And while you do, make sure to follow us on X and check out that new TikTok. Again, there's some good content over there. Right, McKenna?
Yes, seeing as I post the TikTok.
Yes.
Yeah, so become a patron, do all the things, love the specialists, and we will see you tomorrow over on the Patreon.
Bye.